Commander Vex walked slowly through the training hall, his cold eyes looking at each new recruit like they were bugs he wanted to step on. The room was filled with different alien species, all eager to prove themselves worthy of joining the most elite fighting force in the galaxy. Near the back wall stood the Krillian warriors. These massive creatures looked like walking tanks made of living bone and muscle. Their natural armor plates caught the overhead lights, making them shine like polished metal. Each Krillian stood nearly 8 feet tall, with arms thick as tree, trunks and mandibles that could crush steel. Had been bred for war on a planet where only the strongest survived each brutal day. On the opposite side, the Nexari scouts moved in perfect harmony. These four-armed aliens were built for speed and precision. Their silver skin rippled with each movement, and their large black eyes could track multiple targets at once. When they practiced their combat drills, they moved so fast that human eyes could barely follow them. Their home world had gravity 3 times stronger than Earth, making them incredibly quick and agile in normal conditions. Then there was Kate Miller. She stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, looking like a child next to the alien giants around her. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her standard-issue uniform hung loose on her small frame. While the other species had natural weapons and armor, Kate looked completely ordinary. She had no claws, no extra arms, no thick hide to protect her. The moment Commander Vex announced the first combat trials, the atmosphere in the room changed. The aliens began making their species versions of laughter. The Krillians clicked their mandibles together, creating a sound like breaking bones. The Nexari made hypo-hyped chirping noises that hurt human ears. Even the smaller alien species seemed amused by Kate's presence. "Look at that tiny thing," whispered Zane, a Nexari scout whose silver skin gleamed under the lights. "I've seen house pets bigger than her." The combat assessment began with strength tests. One by one, each recruit stepped up to punch a reinforced metal target designed to measure impact force. The Krillian warriors went first, their massive fists creating thunderous booms that echoed through the training hall. The impact sensors lit up with numbers that made the watching aliens nod with approval. Some of the strongest Krillians, actually, broke the testing equipment, sending sparks flying across the room. When Kate's turn came, the entire hall fell silent. She stepped up to the target, drew back her small fist, and threw her best punch. The impact barely registered on the sensors. The number that appeared on the display was so low that several aliens thought the machine was broken. Scattered laughter filled the room. Next came the speed trials. The Nexari scouts moved like living lightning, their forearms creating blur patterns as they struck multiple targets in rapid succession. Their times were so fast that the computer had to slow down the recordings just so other species could see what happened. Kate ran the same course, but her time was painfully slow compared to the aliens. She stumbled twice on obstacles that the Nexari had flowed over like water. By the time she finished, some of the aliens had already lost interest and were talking among themselves. The endurance test was equally embarrassing. While aliens from high-gravity worlds barely seemed winded after running for miles, Kate was breathing hard and sweating after just a few laps around the training track. "This is ridiculous," growled Thane, the largest Krillian warrior in the group. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. "Why did they even accept this weak little creature? She can't fight, she can't run, she can barely lift her own weapon." Other aliens began joining in with their complaints. "My species' children are stronger than her," said another recruit. "She get real soldiers killed in combat." "Humans are only good for carrying supplies and cleaning equipment," added Zane, with a dismissive wave of his forearms. "They don't belong in actual combat situations." Kate stood quietly through all the insults, her face showing no emotion. Her dark eyes moved from one alien speaker to another, but she never responded to their cruel words. Her hands remained steady at her sides, and she kept her back straight despite the humiliation. But those who looked closely might have noticed something the laughing aliens missed. Kate wasn't angry or upset by their mockery. Instead, there was something else in her expression. It was the look of someone who was studying everything around her, learning about each alien species through their behavior and reactions. It was The patience of someone who knew that strength came in many different forms. The testing continued for hours, and Kate finished last in every single trial. The aliens' laughter grew louder with each failure. The peaceful morning at the Defense Corps headquarters was suddenly torn apart by the piercing sound of the emergency alarm. The loud wailing noise echoed through every corridor and training room, making everyone freeze in place. Soldiers stopped. Their exercises, conversations, ended mid-sentence, and heads turned toward the nearest communication screens. Commander Vex rushed to the main command center, his boots clicking against the metal floor. The massive holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. But everyone's attention focused on one particular spot that pulsed with an angry red light. The distress beacon was coming. From Research Station Omega, a remote scientific outpost on the edge of known space. All senior staff to the briefing room immediately. Vex's voice boomed through the station's speakers. Within minutes, the room was packed with alien soldiers from different species. The air grew thick with tension as everyone waited to hear. What kind of crisis required an emergency response? Vex's face was grim as he began speaking. We've lost contact with Research Station Omega on Nightfall Prime. The automated distress beacon activated 6 hours ago with a code red classification. He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. Initial reports indicate a complete Shadow Maw containment breach. The reaction in the room was immediate. Even the bravest alien warriors took a step back. Krillian soldiers, who feared nothing in normal combat, began clicking their mandibles nervously. The four-armed Nexari scouts, usually confident and quick, with jokes, fell completely silent. Everyone in the galaxy knew about Shadow Maws. These creatures were unlike anything else in the known universe. They weren't just dangerous predators. They were something far worse. Scientists believed they existed, partially in normal space and partially in another dimension that humans couldn't even understand. This meant they could appear and disappear without warning, moving through solid walls like they weren't even there. But the most terrifying thing about Shadow Maws wasn't their ability to phase in and out of reality. It was their intelligence. These creatures seemed to know what their enemies would do before the enemies themselves knew it. Soldiers would raise their weapons, and the Shadow Maw would already be moving to avoid the shot. Teams would plan complex attack strategies, only to find the creatures waiting for them exactly where they were supposed to be safe. "How many military teams have been sent to deal with Shadow Maw outbreaks?" asked one of the senior officers. Vex's expression grew even darker. "In the past 50 years, we've responded to 7 confirmed Shadow Maw incidents. Every single mission ended with complete loss of personnel. No survivors, no bodies recovered, no equipment retrieved." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Everyone was doing the math in their heads. 7 missions, 0 survivors. Those weren't the kind of odds that any sane soldier wanted to face. However, Vex continued, "We cannot abandon the research station. There are 43 scientists and support staff trapped inside. Our duty is clear. We're sending Alpha Team for an emergency evacuation mission." He activated another hologram, this one showing the faces and names of the chosen team members. The list included some of the most elite fighters in the Defense Corps. Krillian warriors with decades of combat experience, Nexari scouts who had survived impossible missions, technical specialists with advanced degrees in xenobiology and combat engineering. And there, at the bottom of the list, was Kate Miller's name and photo. The reaction was immediate and loud. Alien soldiers throughout the room began making their species versions of shocked laughter. The Krillian's mandible clicking sounded like a machine gun firing. The Nexari's high-pitched chirping filled the air like an alarm system going haywire. "This has to be a mistake," said Damon, a massive Krillian whose scars told stories of countless battles. "Why would they send the weakest recruit on the most dangerous mission in the galaxy?" Brick, an Nexari scout known for his speed and precision, shook his forearms in disbelief. "She'll be torn apart before we even land on the planet. Shadow Maws can sense fear, and humans reek of it." "Maybe they're planning to use her as bait," suggested another alien with dark humor. Throw the human at the creatures while the real soldiers escape with the scientists? Kate heard every comment, but she didn't respond. Instead, she quietly walked to the equipment room and began gathering her gear. She strapped on the standard body armor, though it looked oversized on her small frame. She checked her plasma rifle. Even though everyone knew such weapons were useless against creatures that could phase through matter. But then Kate did something that made the other soldiers pause and stare. She pulled out a worn leather journal from her personal locker. The book looked old and well-used, with pages that had been turned thousands of times. The cover was scratched and faded, and it was held together with a simple rubber band. "That's supposed to be?" asked Brick, pointing at the journal with one of his forehands. "Your diary? Are you planning to write about your feelings while the monsters eat everyone?" Kate carefully placed the journal in a secure pocket of her combat vest. "Research notes," she said quietly, her voice so calm it made the aliens uncomfortable. "Research. Notes about what?" Damon demanded. "How to die quickly." But Kate had already turned away, checking and double-checking her equipment with the methodical precision of someone who had done this kind of preparation many times before. Her movements were deliberate and practiced, not at all like someone who was scared or unprepared. The other soldiers continued making jokes and placing bets on how long the human would survive. But something in Kate's quiet confidence made a few of the more experienced warriors wonder if there was more to this small human than they had realized. The transport ship approached Research Station Omega slowly, its sensors struggling to penetrate the thick darkness surrounding the facility. What should have been a brightly lit research outpost now looked like a dead hulk floating in space. Only a few emergency lights flickered weakly through the observation windows, casting strange red shadows that moved and danced like living things. Alpha Team gathered at the airlock, checking their weapons one final time. The Krillian warriors towered over everyone else, their massive frames barely fitting through the ship's corridors. Their natural armor plating gleamed under the artificial lights, and their mandibles clicked nervously. Even these battle-hardened soldiers seemed uneasy about what they might find inside the station. The Nexari scouts moved with their usual fluid grace, but their forearms twitched constantly as they adjusted and readjusted their equipment. There, large black eyes darted around the transport bay, looking for threats that weren't there yet. These creatures had survived on a world where everything tried to kill them, but even they had never faced anything like a shadow maw. Kate stood quietly among the alien soldiers, looking impossibly small next to her teammates. Her standard-issue armor made soft clicking sounds as she moved, and her plasma rifle seemed too big for her hands. But her dark eyes remained calm and focused, studying everything around her with the patience of someone who knew how to wait and watch. "Remember," Commander Vex's voice crackled through their communication devices, "this is a rescue mission only. Get in, find the survivors, get out. Do not engage the creatures unless absolutely necessary." The airlock opened with a soft hiss, revealing the dark corridors of Research Station Omega. The air inside smelled wrong, like metal and fear mixed with something wild and dangerous. Emergency lighting strips along the walls provided just enough red light to see a few feet ahead, but the shadows seemed deeper and darker than they should have been. Tom Bradley, the team's human tech specialist, held his scanner with shaking hands. The device beeped and chirped as it tried to make sense of the readings it was getting. "This doesn't make sense," he whispered. "The life signs keep appearing and disappearing like they're not really there." The team moved through the station's main corridor in careful formation. The Krillian warriors took point, their heavy footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Behind them, the Nexari scouts spread out to cover the flanks, their forearms holding different weapons and sensors. Kate and Tom brought up the rear, their human eyes straining to see in the dim lighting. That's when they found the first bodies. The previous rescue team was scattered throughout the corridor like broken dolls, but these weren't random kills from panicked predators. Each body had been torn apart with surgical precision, as if the creatures had known exactly where to strike for maximum damage. Weapons lay unused beside their owners, suggesting the soldiers hadn't even had time to fire before being killed. "How is this possible?" breathed Damon, the largest Krillian warrior. His voice carried a tremor that his species rarely showed. These were elite fighters. They had the best weapons and armor in the galaxy. Brick, the Nexari scout, examined one of the bodies with his 4 hands moving independently. "Look at the wound patterns," he said quietly. Whatever did this knew exactly where their vital organs were located. It's like the creatures had studied their anatomy beforehand. Tom's scanner began beeping more rapidly, its small screen lighting up with urgent warnings. "Movement detected," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Level 7, Section C, multiple contacts, but the readings keep shifting." The team moved forward with increased caution, their weapons raised and ready. The corridor ahead seemed to stretch on forever, with branching hallways disappearing into absolute darkness. Their footsteps sounded unnaturally loud in the silence, and every small noise made them jump. Then the temperature dropped. It wasn't gradual. One moment the air was normal, and the next it felt like they had walked into a freezer. Their breath began forming small clouds, and frost started appearing on the metal walls around them. The emergency lighting flickered and dimmed, as if something was draining power from the station's systems. That's when the first Shadow Maw appeared. It didn't walk out of a doorway or drop from the ceiling. Instead, it simply materialized from the darkness itself, like smoke being given solid form. The creature stood 8 feet tall, with rippling muscles that seemed to shift and flow beneath skin that was darker than the space between stars. Its eyes burned with a cold light that hurt to look at directly. But the most terrifying thing about the Shadow Maw was how it moved. The creature's form kept shifting between solid and translucent, like it existed in multiple dimensions at the same time. One moment it looked completely real, and the next it was nothing more than a shadow with glowing eyes. The Krillian warriors reacted instantly, their training taking over. "Contact front," Damon roared, raising his heavy plasma cannon. The weapon charged with a high-pitched whine before firing a bolt of superheated energy. Directly at the creature's center mass, the plasma bolt passed right through the Shadow Maw, as if it wasn't there. The creature had phased out of normal reality just as the shot was fired, existing in whatever strange dimension allowed it to ignore physical attacks. But even more disturbing was what happened next. The Shadow Maw's head turned toward the Nexari scouts before they even began their flanking maneuver. "It knows what we're going to do," Brick said in horror, his 4 arms frozen in mid-motion. "It's reading our minds, or our movements or something." The creature moved with impossible speed, flowing across the floor like liquid shadow. 2 soldiers screamed as claws materialized just long enough to tear through their armor, then faded back into nothingness. The Shadow Maw seemed to be playing with them, appearing just long enough to attack, before vanishing again. Panic spread through the team as their weapons proved useless, and their tactics were anticipated before they could execute them. The corridor, filled with the sounds of desperate gunfire, shouted orders, and the terrible screams of soldiers who realized they were facing something beyond their understanding. That's when Kate did something that made everyone stop and stare. She stepped forward, walking directly toward the Shadow Maw, with her hands completely empty. No weapons, no scanner, no protective equipment. Just a small human woman approaching a nightmare creature that had just torn apart some of the galaxy's best soldiers. The Shadow Maw froze in the middle of its attack, its massive head turning toward Kate with an expression that looked almost like curiosity. For a moment that stretched like hours, the Predator and the human looked at each other across the blood-stained corridor. Then Kate slowly crouched down and placed her palm flat against the cold metal floor. Kate's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. "Stand down," she called softly to her teammates, her eyes never leaving the Shadow Maw that towered above her. "Lower your weapons and back away slowly." The alien soldiers stared at her in complete shock. Damon, the massive Krillian warrior, kept his plasma cannon raised and ready. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he hissed through his mandibles. "That thing just killed 2 of our team members." But something in Kate's tone made him hesitate. There was no fear in her voice, no panic or desperation. Instead, she sounded like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, even in the face of certain death. One by one, the surviving soldiers began lowering their weapons. Though they kept their fingers close to the triggers, Kate began making sounds that none of the aliens had ever heard before. They weren't quite humming and weren't quite singing. Instead, they were low, rhythmic tones that seemed to come from deep in her chest. The sounds echoed through the metal corridors of the station, creating harmonic vibrations that made the air itself seem to pulse with meaning. As she made these strange vocalizations, Kate's entire body language changed. She moved slowly and deliberately, making herself smaller and less threatening. Her shoulders dropped, her head tilted slightly to one side, and her movements became fluid and non-aggressive. It was like watching a wolf acknowledge the pack leader, showing respect without showing weakness. The Shadow Maw's burning eyes narrowed as it studied this small human who dared to approach it without weapons or armor. The creature's massive head tilted to match Kate's angle, and then something incredible happened. The Shadow Maw responded with its own sound, a deep rumble that was felt more than heard. The vibration traveled through the station's hull, making the metal walls hum with resonance. "Before I joined the Defense Corps," Kate said quietly, never breaking her crouched position, "I was a wildlife behaviorist on Earth. I spent 15 years studying apex predators in places like Yellowstone National Park and the Amazon rainforest." Tom, the human tech specialist, looked at her with wide eyes. He had worked with Kate for months, but had never known about her background. The alien soldiers were equally surprised, their weapons still lowered, but ready to fire at the first sign of danger. "These creatures aren't mindless monsters," Kate continued, her voice remaining calm and steady. "They're highly intelligent territorial animals with complex social structures. Every behavior they've shown follows predictable patterns if you know how to read them." The Shadow Maw took a step closer, its massive form becoming more solid as it focused its attention on Kate. The creature's shadowy exterior seemed to stabilize, revealing details that had been hidden before. Its skin wasn't actually black, but rather a deep purple that shifted and flowed like liquid. Intricate patterns covered its hide, almost like tribal markings that told a story only the creatures themselves could understand. Kate continued her vocalizations, but now she added subtle hand gestures that seemed to mirror the creature's own movements. When the Shadow Maw tilted its head, Kate's hands moved in a similar pattern. When it shifted its weight, her fingers traced matching shapes in the air. It was like watching a conversation conducted in a language that no one else could understand.
"What?"
"Research station was built on their breeding grounds," Kate said. Her words directed both at her teammates and at the creature watching her. "Look at the location data. This facility was constructed directly over a network of underground caves that extend for miles beneath the surface." Brick, the four-armed Nexari scout, checked his scanner with trembling hands. "She's right," he whispered. "There are massive hollow spaces below us. The geological surveys from 3 years ago show extensive cave systems throughout this entire region." Kate nodded without taking her eyes off the Shadow Maw. "They're not attacking randomly, or for food. They're defending their children. This is their nursery, their sacred space where they raise the next generation." As if summoned by her words, more Shadow Maws began materializing from the darkness around them. But instead of attacking, they formed a loose circle around Kate and the original creature. Their eyes glowed with that same cold fire, but their posture was different now. They moved like curious observers rather than hungry predators. The alien soldiers tensed, expecting an assault from multiple directions. But Kate remained perfectly calm, continuing her strange sounds and gestures as if she were conducting some kind of interspecies orchestra. "These creatures are intelligent enough to understand complex concepts," she explained to her teammates, while somehow also addressing the Shadow Maws. "They know the difference between soldiers who come to kill and someone who comes to communicate." Scanner began picking up new readings. "The energy signatures are changing," he reported with amazement, "not preparing to phase out anymore. It's like they're choosing to stay solid." Kate slowly began to rise from her crouched position, moving with the careful deliberation of someone approaching a wild animal. The largest Shadow Maw, clearly the pack leader, stepped forward to meet her. Standing upright, Kate barely reached the creature's chest, but she showed no fear as they faced each other. "I need to speak with you about finding a solution," she said. though her words were obviously directed at the creature rather than her human teammates, a way that doesn't require more death on either side. The pack leader made a sound that was different from the others, more complex and layered with meaning. Kate listened intently, her head tilted as if she were trying to understand a foreign language. Then she responded with her own series of vocalizations, creating what looked like the galaxy's most unlikely diplomatic conversation. "How is this possible?" Damon whispered to Brick. "Humans are supposed to be the weakest species in the galaxy. How does she know how to communicate with creatures that have killed hundreds of trained soldiers?" Kate heard the question and answered without turning around. "On Earth, we learned that intelligence and strength aren't the same thing. The most dangerous predators are also the smartest ones. And if they're smart enough to be dangerous, they're smart enough to be reasoned with." The pack leader stepped even closer, bringing its massive head down to Kate's eye level. For a moment that seemed to stretch forever, human and Shadow Maw regarded each other with mutual respect and understanding. Then the creature did something that made every alien soldier gasp in shock, lowered its head in what could only be described as a bow, acknowledging Kate as someone worthy of its attention and respect. The rescue operation that everyone expected to end in disaster was now being completed without a single shot being fired. Kate walked slowly through the corridors of Research Station Omega, and beside her moved the massive pack leader of the Shadow Maws. The creature that had terrified the galaxy's best soldiers now glided alongside a small human woman, like a loyal companion. The pack leader's movements were completely different from the aggressive stalking behavior it had shown earlier. Instead of the predatory grace of a hunter, it now moved with the calm dignity of someone conducting an honored guest through their territory. Its burning eyes no longer held malice, but rather a kind of respectful curiosity as it watched Kate navigate through the station. Behind them, a long line of rescued scientists and research staff walked in careful formation. These people had been trapped for days, expecting to die at any moment, as Shadow Maws hunted through the station. Now they were being escorted to safety by the very creatures they had feared most. They kept glancing nervously at their escorts, but the Shadow Maws made no threatening moves whatsoever. Dr. Chen, the station's lead researcher, walked near the front of the group, carrying a small case of essential data. "I still can't believe this is happening," she whispered to her colleague. 6 hours ago we were preparing to die, and now we're walking out with the Shadow Maw honor guard." Kate's voice carried clearly through the station's corridors as she spoke, both to the pack leader beside her and to Commander Vex through her communication device. "The northern continent of the planet has everything they need," she explained, gesturing with one hand while the other held a detailed map. "The terrain surveys show extensive cave networks that go deep underground, perfect for raising their young safely." She paused to look at the pack leader, who rumbled a low sound that resonated through the metal walls. Kate had learned to recognize this particular vocalization as agreement and satisfaction. It was like the creature was saying, "Yes, that sounds good," in its own language. "The prey animals in that region are plentiful, but not sentient," Kate continued. "Large herbivores that migrate in predictable patterns, similar to what they would have hunted before this station was built. Most importantly, the area is hundreds of miles from any human settlements, so there won't be any conflicts in the future." The pack leader made another sound, this one more complex and layered. 8. Listened carefully, her head tilted as she processed what the creature was trying to communicate. Then she nodded and spoke again. "They want assurance that no more research stations will be built in their sacred areas," she translated for Commander Vex. "They're willing to relocate peacefully, but they need guarantees that their new territory will be respected, Commander." Vex's voice crackled through the communication system with obvious relief. "Tell them they have my personal guarantee. I'll make sure the Galactic Council designates their new territory as a protected zone. No development, no research facilities, no military installations." The evacuation continued smoothly, with groups of scientists being led to the transport ships, while Shadow Maws watched from the shadows. What should have been a terrifying gauntlet of death had become an orderly withdrawal under the protection of the very creatures everyone had feared. Back aboard the rescue ship, the atmosphere had completely changed. The same alien soldiers who had mocked Kate just days before now watched her with expressions that could only be described as awe. They gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. Kate sat in the observation deck with Tom, her old leather journal open on the table between them. She was carefully writing new notes about shadow maw behavior, adding sketches and diagrams to help explain what she had learned. Her handwriting was neat and precise, the work of someone who was used to recording important observations in the field. "How did you know it would work?" Tom asked quietly, his voice full of genuine curiosity rather than the skepticism he had shown earlier. I mean, everyone said these creatures were impossible to communicate with. Military experts, xenobiologists, even AI strategists couldn't figure out how to deal with them. Kate looked up from her writing, her dark eyes reflecting the lights of distant stars through the viewport. "On Earth, we learned something important about apex predators during my years of research. The most dangerous animals are usually also the most intelligent ones. And if a creature is intelligent enough to be truly dangerous, then it's also intelligent enough to be reasoned with." She turned a page in her journal, revealing detailed behavioral notes from dozens of different Earths. Predators. Wolves, big cats, bears, even sharks. They all have complex social structures and communication methods. The key is learning their language instead of trying to force them to understand ours. Commander Vex's voice suddenly filled the ship's speakers, making everyone stop their conversations to listen. "Miller, report to my office immediately upon return to headquarters. The Galactic Council has been monitoring our communications, and they want to discuss creating an entirely new division within the Defense Corps. Congratulations on your promotion to division, leader of Interspecies Communication Protocol." The alien soldiers looked at each other with expressions of shock and respect. A promotion to division leader usually took decades of service and countless successful missions. Kate had earned it in a single afternoon by accomplishing something that no one else in the galaxy had ever managed to do. Through the viewport, everyone could see the shadow maws moving across the surface of their new territory. The creatures flowed like living shadows through the misty atmosphere, finally free to establish their colony in a place where they wouldn't be disturbed. What had started as a rescue mission had become the foundation of the first successful interspecies peace treaty with an apex predator species, Thane. The massive Krillian warrior who had been the most vocal about Kate's supposed weakness approached her table with obvious hesitation. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like embarrassment. "I need to apologize," he said, his mandibles clicking in the pattern that Kate now recognized as genuine respect among his species. "I was completely wrong about humans, and specifically about you. Would you consider allowing Krillians to serve in your new division?" Kate looked up at the towering warrior who had once called her weak and useless. Instead of anger or triumph, her expression showed only the calm confidence of someone who had always known her own worth. "Every pack needs strong hunters, Thane," she said with a slight smile, closing her journal and preparing for the next challenge. "Welcome to the team." The mockery had ended completely. The real work of building bridges between species was just beginning, and Kate Miller was ready to lead the way.